The crystal flute in her hand felt heavier than a block of cement. From behind a pillar at the Grand Plaza Gala, she watched the man who had shattered her life raise a toast. He was with her stepsister, the woman who had helped him do it. They were celebrating his new architectural triumph, a design he'd stolen from the deepest recesses of her soul. Just hours earlier, she had been scrubbing floors to pay her rent. Now, wearing a borrowed uniform, she was serving champagne to the very people who scorned her as his worthless, discarded ex-wife. She thought this was the lowest point of her life. She had no idea that in the shadows a king was watching, waiting to see if a fallen queen would find the strength to rise again. The Grand Plaza ballroom was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and whispered power. For Brittany Wheatly, it was a special kind of hell. 3 years ago, she had walked into this very room on the arm of her then-husband, Gregory Shaw, her mind buzzing with the blueprints for the Ethelgard Tower that she believed would define their shared legacy. Tonight she was entering through the service corridors, her name tag reading simply, "Staff." The scent of industrial cleaner clinging to her black uniform. Her job was simple: circulate, offer champagne, and remain invisible. But invisibility was impossible when the guests of honor were Gregory and her stepsister, Beatrice Vance. They stood in the center of the room, a vortex of camera flashes and sycophantic laughter. Beatrice, draped in a crimson gown that cost more than Brittany's yearly rent, clung to Gregory's arm, her smile a perfect, venomous curve. They were celebrating the groundbreaking of the Ethelgard Tower. Her tower. Brittany remembered the sleepless nights, the hundreds of sketches, the innovative structural concepts she had poured into that project. She remembered explaining it all to Gregory, his eyes alight with what she'd mistaken for shared passion. He had called her a genius then. A few months later, he had called her delusional, unstable, and emotionally draining, as he served her divorce papers, having already filed the patents for her designs under his name alone. He had convinced everyone, from their friends to the courts, that she was a volatile, grasping woman trying to claim the credit for her brilliant husband's work. Beatrice, her own stepsister, had corroborated every lie, her testimony the final nail in the coffin of Brittany's old life. A cold knot of nausea tightened in her stomach. She forced herself to move her tray of champagne flutes, a fragile shield. As she navigated the edge of the crowd, she heard snippets of conversation. Gregory Shaw is a true visionary, and Beatrice is the perfect partner for him. So poised, not like that first wife. I heard she had a complete breakdown. Tried to take him for everything. Each word was a fresh cut. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, focusing on the rhythm of her breathing. Just a few more hours. Then she could go back to her tiny, damp apartment and pretend this night never happened. But fate, it seemed, had a crueler plan. A wave of guests shifted, and she found herself face to face with Camilla Shaw, Gregory's mother. The older woman's perfectly curated face twisted in a sneer of disbelief. Brittany. "My goodness, I suppose one must do what one must to get by," Camilla said, her voice loud enough for those nearby to turn and stare. "Although I must say I'm surprised they let just anyone work an event of this caliber." Brittany's face burned with humiliation. She wanted the marble floor to swallow her whole. "Hello, Camilla. I'm just working," she mumbled, trying to step away. But Camilla wasn't finished. "Gregory is thriving, you know. He always said your artistic temperament was holding him back. Beatrice has been such a stabilizing influence." Before Brittany could escape, the devil himself appeared. Gregory, with Beatrice still attached to his arm, strode over. His smile was a predatory slash. "Well, well. Look what we have here," Gregory said, his eyes raking over her server's uniform with mock pity. "Brittany, always finding a way to be at the center of things, aren't you?" "I'm working, Gregory," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Beatrice's feigned sympathy was even worse. "Oh, Brittany, darling. Is it that bad? If you'd just told us you were struggling, I'm sure we could have sent you something." She reached out as if to touch Brittany's arm in a gesture of pity, but then seemed to think better of it, pulling her hand back as if Brittany were contaminated. The culminating moment of her degradation arrived with a sickening slosh. Beatrice, with a theatrical gasp, stumbled just enough for her full glass of ruby red wine to cascade down the front of Brittany's simple white blouse, the stain spreading like a fresh wound. "Oh, clumsy me!" Beatrice cried, her eyes dancing with malevolent glee. The circle of onlookers gasped. Gregory didn't miss a beat. He let out a condescending chuckle. "Don't worry, darling," he said to Beatrice, completely ignoring Brittany. Then he looked at Brittany, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant only for her. "See, Brittany, this is your place, serving people. You were never meant to build things. You were only ever meant to clean up messes." Something inside Brittany, a fragile thing that had been dormant for 3 years, snapped. The tray in her hands trembled. The humiliation was so absolute, so suffocating she couldn't breathe. Without a word, she turned and fled. She pushed through the astonished crowd, ignoring the whispers and the stares, her vision blurring with hot, unshed tears. She didn't stop until she was out the service exit, and in the cold, rain-slicked alley, the sounds of the party, a muffled taunt behind her. She leaned against the rough brick wall, gasping for air, the cold rain mingling with her tears. He had won. They had won. They had taken her past, her present, and her future, leaving her with nothing but the ashes of a life that was once hers. She didn't notice the sleek black sedan parked in the shadows at the end of the alley, nor did she see the man in the back seat, his face illuminated by the glow of a tablet. He watched her crumpled form with an unreadable expression, his finger tracing the lines of a complex architectural drawing on the screen. It was a university submission from a decade ago, a design of breathtaking audacity and genius. The name on the submission was Brittany Wheatly, and the man watching her, Caspian Devereux, had been searching for that genius for a very long time. He turned to his driver. "We've found her." The week that followed the gala was a descent into a new level of rock bottom. Brittany was fired, of course. A complaint had been lodged by a high-profile guest, no doubt Beatrice or Camilla, about her unprofessional and emotionally erratic behavior. The catering company, not wanting to risk their contract with the Grand Plaza, had let her go without a second thought. The eviction notice that was once a threat was now a stark reality taped to her door. Her savings were gone. Her spirit was in tatters. She spent her days in a gray haze, cycling through job websites for anything receptionist, data entry, coffee shop, barista. Every application felt like another admission of defeat. The brilliant architect who once dreamed of reshaping skylines was now hoping for a minimum wage job that would cover the rent on a room in a shared house. Her only lifeline was her friend Zoe Chen, a sharp-witted journalist who had seen through Gregory's charade from the start. "You can't give up," Brittany Zoe insisted over the phone, her voice a much-needed dose of steel. "He doesn't get to destroy you. That's what he wants." "What am I supposed to do?" "Zoe." Brittany's voice was hollow, echoing the emptiness of her apartment. "He took everything. My name, my work, my confidence. I look at a blank page and I see nothing. He put out the fire." "Then we find a spark and we light a damn bonfire," Zoe retorted. "Just don't isolate yourself. I'm coming over tonight with cheap pizza and expensive wine. Non-negotiable." That evening, as Brittany was half-heartedly clearing a space on her coffee table, an email notification pinged on her ancient laptop. The subject line was unassuming: "Invitation to submit, the Devereux Foundation." She almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. The Devereux Foundation was legendary. Headed by the reclusive and formidable billionaire Caspian Devereux, it was a global entity that funded moonshot projects in tech, science, and the arts. They didn't send out mass emails. Curiosity got the better of her. She clicked it open. The email was starkly minimalist. It announced a confidential competition to design the new Devereux Center for Sustainable Innovation in the heart of the city. The project was monumental, a facility that aimed to blend cutting-edge technology with ecological harmony. The brief was ambitious, almost impossibly so. It called for a structure that was not just zero carbon, but energy positive, a building that gave back to the city grid more than it consumed. A link at the bottom led to a secure portal for submissions. The deadline was in 72 hours. It had to be a mistake. A glitch in their system. They were soliciting proposals from the world's top architectural firms like Shaw Industries' Gregory's company, not from a disgraced, unemployed architect working from a crumbling apartment. There was no way they would want her. She was about to close the window when a line from the design brief caught her eye. "We seek a design that is not merely a structure but a statement. We are not looking for what is possible. We are looking for what is necessary for the future, however audacious it may seem." Audacious. The word struck a chord deep inside her. It was the exact word Gregory had used to dismiss her most ambitious ideas. "Your concepts are audacious, Brittany," he'd say, his tone patronizing. "But they're not practical. The real world requires compromise." He had slowly, methodically sanded down the sharp, innovative edges of her creativity until all that was left was a dull, marketable version he could call his own. For the first time in 3 years, a flicker of defiance stirred in her chest. A mistake or not, this was a challenge. This was the kind of project she had dreamed of before Gregory had taught her to shrink her dreams. "What have I got to lose?" she whispered to the empty room. When Zoe arrived, she found Brittany not wallowing in despair but hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen, a frantic energy radiating from her. Her old drafting table, long since folded and stored, was now open, covered in sketches. "Whoa," Zoe said, setting down the pizza. "What's this? I thought we were mourning your career, not resurrecting it." Brittany explained the email, the impossible project, the insane deadline. "It's crazy, I know. I don't have the resources, the software. I don't have a chance. But Zoe, for the first time in years I feel something." For the next 72 hours, Brittany didn't sleep. She barely ate. She lived on black coffee and sheer adrenaline. She worked with a feverish intensity she thought was long dead. All the ideas Gregory had mocked, all the concepts he had called flights of fancy, came pouring out. She designed a building with a biokinetic facade with panels that shifted like the leaves of a plant to follow the sun. She integrated a vertical farming system that would feed the building's staff, a water reclamation system that pulled moisture from the air, and a geothermal core that would power the entire block. It was bold. It was radical. It was, by Gregory Shaw's standards, completely insane. It was 100% Brittany Wheatly. She didn't have the expensive rendering software Shaw Industries used. Her submission was composed of hand-drawn sketches, detailed technical notes, and a passionately written manifesto about the philosophy behind her design. It felt deeply personal, almost like baring her soul. With 5 minutes to spare before the deadline, exhausted and trembling, she clicked Submit. She leaned back in her chair, the silence of her apartment rushing in. The flicker of defiance had become a small, hopeful flame. It was almost certainly going to be extinguished. The system would probably auto-reject her submission for not being in the correct format. But as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, she allowed herself a tiny, dangerous thought. What if it didn't? A week passed in agonizing silence. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the familiar gnawing of self-doubt. The eviction notice on her door seemed to mock her foolish burst of hope. Brittany started packing her few belongings into cardboard boxes, the scraped-together deposit for a room in a shared house, her only goal. The Devereux gambit had been a final, desperate fantasy before accepting her new reality. Then an email with the Devereux Foundation letterhead landed in her inbox. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened it. It wasn't a rejection. It was an invitation for a final stage presentation. Tomorrow. At Devereux Tower. Panic warred with disbelief. They had to be a mistake. They must have mistaken her for someone else, another L. Wheatly from a prestigious firm. But the email was addressed to her, referencing specific details from her manifesto. She had nothing to wear. Her professional wardrobe had been sold off long ago. All she had was a simple charcoal gray sheath dress and a matching blazer, both from a thrift store. They were clean and pressed, but they felt like a costume for a life she no longer lived. The next morning, Brittany stood in the cavernous, minimalist lobby of Devereux Tower. It was a monument of steel glass and hushed, intimidating wealth. Men and women in exquisitely tailored suits moved with an air of purpose, their confident strides echoing on the polished marble. Brittany felt like a ghost, her worn-out heels sinking into the plush carpeting. As she waited for the elevator, a familiar, hated voice cut through the air. "Brittany." I knew I recognized that look of a lost puppy. She turned. Gregory Shaw stood there looking infuriatingly perfect in a custom-tailored Italian suit. He was flanked by two of his top architects, both carrying sleek portfolios. He was obviously there for the same reason she was. A cruel, knowing smirk spread across his face. "Don't tell me you're here for the Devereux project. Oh, that's rich. Did you send them some doodles on a napkin? You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Brittany's cheeks flushed. She clutched her simple portfolio folder, which suddenly felt cheap and childish. "I was invited. Gregory." He laughed, a loud, dismissive sound that drew stares. "Invited, sweetheart." They probably needed a diversity candidate, a sob story to fill a quota. "Let the professionals handle this. Go back to whatever catering gig you're working now. It's a better fit." The elevator doors chimed open. Gregory and his team swept past her, him deliberately bumping her shoulder as he entered. "Good luck." He sneered, the doors closing on his mocking face. The humiliation stung, but it also ignited something else, anger. Hot, clarifying anger. How dare he? How dare he continue to treat her as if she were nothing? By the time she was called to the top-floor conference room, her fear had been replaced by a cold, resolute determination. The room was vast, with a single floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city. There was no boardroom table, no committee. There was only one man standing with his back to her, looking out at the skyline. He turned, and Brittany felt the air leave her lungs. Caspian Devereux was not what she had expected. He wasn't old or soft. He was in his late 30s with an intense, unnerving presence. He had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her, and a stillness that spoke of immense, coiled power. "Ms. Wheatly," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone. "Thank you for coming." He didn't offer to shake her hand. He simply gestured to a large digital display screen. "The floor is yours." Heart-pounding, Brittany began. She talked through her sketches, her voice shaky at first, then gaining strength as her passion for the project took over. She didn't just describe the building. She described the philosophy behind it. A structure that breathes, that coexists with its environment, that serves its community. She spoke of biomimicry, of symbiotic systems, of her dream of an architecture that healed rather than dominated. Caspian Devereux remained silent throughout her presentation. He didn't nod or smile or give any indication of what he was thinking. His gaze was so intense it was almost physical. When she finished, the silence stretched thick and heavy. "Your design is audacious," he said, using that same loaded word. Brittany's heart sank. Here it comes. The dismissal. "It is also, by current construction standards, borderline impossible," he continued, his eyes locked on hers. "The kinetic facade you propose has never been built on this scale. The atmospheric water generation system is unproven in a dense urban environment. Your budget projections are optimistic, to say the least." He paused, and Brittany braced herself. "Mr. Shaw, who presented before you." Caspian went on, his tone flat, offered a design that was safe, predictable, and guaranteed to be completed on time and on budget. It was a competent, uninspired copy of every other glass tower out there. "Why should I risk $1 billion investment on your dream?" The question was a direct challenge, a test. The old Brittany would have crumbled. The old Brittany would have apologized for wasting his time. But this was the new Brittany. The Brittany fueled by 3 years of repressed rage and a 72-hour blaze of rediscovered passion. She met his gaze without flinching, because, "Mr. Devereux, you didn't ask for a building. You asked for a statement. You asked for the future. Safe and predictable won't change the world. Competence doesn't inspire. My design is a risk. But the biggest risk of all is to aim for mediocrity when greatness is possible. You can have another glass tower, or you can have a living landmark. The choice is yours." She held her breath, her defiant words hanging in the air. Caspian Devereux stared at her for a long, silent moment. A slow, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of his mouth. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of recognition, of discovery. "My assistant will be in touch, Ms. Wheatly," he said, a clear dismissal. Brittany walked out of the room feeling strangely light. She didn't know if she had won or lost, but she knew she had spoken her truth. For the first time in a very long time, she hadn't let Gregory Shaw have the last word. As she waited for the elevator, she had no way of knowing that Caspian was now watching a split screen on his monitor. One side showed her standing with quiet dignity in the hall. The other side showed a live security feed from the lobby where Gregory was loudly telling his team how he had the project in the bag and how he'd put his charity case ex-wife back in her place. Caspian pressed a button on his intercom. "Catherine," he said, "draw up the contract for Ms. Wheatly. Full creative control. And double the preliminary budget. I want her to have everything she needs." Brittany spent the next 24 hours in a state of suspended animation. She had stood up to Gregory. She had spoken her mind to a billionaire. She had done everything right, and yet she fully expected never to hear from the Devereux Foundation again. The world, in her experience, didn't reward women who spoke up. It punished them. She was halfway through packing her last box of books when her phone rang, displaying an unknown number with a downtown exchange. "Is this Brittany Wheatly?" a crisp professional voice asked. "Yes," Brittany answered, her heart skipping a beat. "This is Catherine Vance, executive assistant to Mr. Caspian Devereux. Mr. Devereux has asked me to inform you that the Devereux Foundation would like to formally offer you the contract for the Center for Sustainable Innovation." Brittany sank onto a cardboard box, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. I don't understand. The contract is being couriered to you now." Catherine continued, her tone matter-of-fact. "It grants you full creative and operational oversight as lead architect. Mr. Devereux has also approved a preliminary operating budget that is substantial. He requests a meeting with you at your earliest convenience to discuss the onboarding process. Are you available this afternoon?" Numbly, Brittany agreed. The call ended. She stared at the wall, her mind reeling. Full creative control. Substantial budget. It felt like a dream, a cruel joke. 2 hours later, she was back in the Lion's Den Devereux Tower. This time, she wasn't led to a conference room, but to Caspian Devereux's private office. It was a corner suite with panoramic views, but the space itself was surprisingly personal, lined with bookshelves filled with old leather-bound volumes on engineering, philosophy, and art. Caspian was standing by the window, much like before. He turned as she entered. "Ms. Wheatly." "Brittany." "Please sit." He gestured to one of 2 leather armchairs. As she sat, a courier-delivered contract thick as a novel lay on the table between them. "I imagine you have questions," he said, taking the seat opposite her. "1 or 2, Brittany managed, her voice still shaky. "Why me?" "My proposal is theoretical. I don't have a firm. I don't have staff. You have a mind that Gregory Shaw was not intelligent enough to appreciate." Caspian cut in, his voice sharp and direct. The casual mention of Gregory's name was like a small explosion in the quiet room. Brittany stared at him, bewildered. "You know Gregory?" "I know of him," Caspian corrected. "I make it my business to know my competition. I also make it my business to investigate talent. Your name first came across my desk 10 years ago. You won the Alistair Prize for your university thesis on symbiotic architecture. It was a revolutionary paper. And then, you disappeared. Your name was attached to a few minor projects at Shaw Industries, but the innovation, the fire, was gone. Instead, Gregory Shaw suddenly started winning awards for his bold new vision." He leaned forward slightly, his intense gaze pinning her in place. "I suspected for years that he was a fraud, a charismatic frontman for a ghostwriter. I just didn't know who the ghost was. When Shaw Industries became a primary bidder for this project, I did a deeper dive. The divorce records, the sealed testimony. It wasn't hard to piece together, but I had to be sure. I had to know if the genius from that university paper was still in there. It all clicked into place. The anonymous competition, the impossible brief, the direct invitation to her personal email. It wasn't a mistake. It was a test. The whole thing Brittany breathed it was for me. It was a recruitment process. Caspian confirmed. I didn't want the architect who had been beaten down by Gregory Shaw. I wanted the architect who wrote that thesis. I needed to see if she would fight for her ideas when challenged. You did not disappoint. Brittany felt a dizzying mix of vindication shock and a profound, bone-deep relief that was so overwhelming it almost felt like grief. Someone had seen her. Someone had known the truth all along. What Gregory did to you was more than theft, Caspian said, his voice lowering, losing its hard business edge and taking on a note of cold anger. It was a systematic erasure. He tried to convince the world and you that you were worthless. He was wrong. He pushed the contract across the table. This is your chance to prove it. I am giving you the resources, the backing, and the platform to build the future you envisioned a decade ago. We have already secured a floor of this building for your team. You will have access to my top engineers, lawyers, and project managers. Your only constraint is your own imagination. Tears welled in Brittany's eyes, hot and unstoppable. But they weren't tears of sadness or humiliation. They were tears of liberation. There is one more thing, Caspian said, rising and walking over to his desk. He picked up a small, elegant black box and brought it back to the table. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not a piece of jewelry, but a set of exquisitely crafted drafting pens made of titanium and carbon fiber. They were tools, not trinkets. A queen needs a scepter, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But the queen I am backing is a creator. Her power isn't in a title. It's in her ability to build empires. These are your tools. Go build yours. Brittany looked from the pens to the contract, then up at the formidable man in front of her. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He wasn't a prince saving a damsel. He was a king recognizing another monarch, one who had been deposed and exiled. He was offering her not a rescue but an arsenal. He was giving her back her kingdom. With a hand that was finely steady, Brittany Wheatly picked up one of the pens and signed the contract that would not only change her life, but reshape the city's skyline forever. The transformation was immediate and absolute. Brittany moved from a world of gray desperation into one of dizzying potential. Her office on the 47th floor of Devereux Tower was a minimalist expanse of glass and white oak with a drafting table that was a marvel of modern technology and a view that made her feel like she could touch the clouds. For the first few weeks, she battled a crippling case of imposter syndrome. She was surrounded by the best and brightest engineers from MIT, urban planners from Stockholm, material scientists from Kyoto, all hand-picked by Caspian, and all looking to her for leadership. The old voices, Gregory's voices, whispered in her ear that she was a fraud, that she would be found out. But Caspian had anticipated this. He wasn't an absentee benefactor. He was an active, demanding partner. He met with her daily not to micromanage, but to challenge and empower. Your kinetic facade concept is brilliant, but the material stress calculations are weak, he'd state, pointing to a blueprint. I've arranged a consultation with Dr. Eris Thorne, who developed the composites for our aerospace division. Convince him. Your water reclamation plan is too conservative, he'd argue. Think bigger. What if the building could combat citywide drought? I want a proposal on my desk by Friday. He pushed her relentlessly. He debated her, questioned her, and forced her to defend every single choice. And with each successful defense, with each problem solved, Brittany felt a piece of her old self, the confident visionary architect, click back into place. She wasn't his employee. She was his intellectual sparring partner. She discovered that his ruthless reputation in business was built not on cruelty, but on an uncompromising demand for excellence. He respected her mind, and in doing so, he taught her to respect it again herself. Their relationship remained fiercely professional, yet an undercurrent of something deeper began to grow. It was in the late-night sessions debating the philosophical implications of artificial intelligence in building management fueled by coffee and a shared obsessive passion for creation. It was in the rare small smiles he gave her when she solved a particularly complex engineering problem. He saw her not as a woman to be saved, but as a force to be unleashed. Brittany in turn began to see the man behind the billionaire myth. She saw the loneliness in his solitary dedication, the immense weight of the empire he commanded, and a surprising vulnerability when he spoke of his father, a brilliant engineer who had died before seeing his own dreams realized. They were two people who found solace not in small talk, but in the grand language of ambition and design. Meanwhile, the news that Brittany Wheatly was heading the most prestigious architectural project in a generation sent shockwaves through the industry. Gregory Shaw was blindsided. He had heard rumors of a mystery architect, but never in his wildest nightmares did he imagine it was her. His reaction was swift and vicious. He began a smear campaign. Industry blogs and gossip columns were suddenly seeded with anonymous stories about a difficult, unstable architect who had been fired from her last major project, his own for emotional incompetence. Articles appeared questioning the wisdom of the Devereux Foundation for entrusting a billion-dollar project to a complete unknown with a history of professional failures. Beatrice, now a prominent socialite, played her part perfectly. In charity luncheon interviews, she would sigh with theatrical sadness. "We all wish Brittany the best, of course," she'd say, a pained expression on her face. "We just worry she's taken on too much. Her health, her stability, has always been fragile." They tried to poach her staff, offering exorbitant salaries to her top engineers. They filed frivolous legal challenges questioning zoning permits and environmental impact reports, all designed to bleed her project with delays and costs. Brittany felt the old panic rising. The world they were painting was the one Gregory had made her believe herself. But this time she wasn't alone. Caspian's counteroffensive was silent, swift, and lethal. His legal team quashed the challenges with surgical precision. His PR department traced the source of the planted stories and fed exclusive damning information about Gregory's own business dealings to Zoe Chen, who gleefully published a meticulously researched exposé on Shaw Industries' history of cutting corners and stealing designs without ever mentioning Brittany. Investors in Shaw Industries grew nervous. One evening, finding Brittany staring worriedly at another negative press clipping, Caspian stood beside her at the office window. "He is a dog barking at a star, Brittany," he said quietly. "His noise cannot diminish your light. Let him choke on his own bitterness." He then changed the subject, pulling her attention back to a complex airflow model, but his message was clear. "I am your shield. You just focus on building." And so she did. Under her leadership, the project wasn't just on schedule. It was evolving into something even more magnificent than her initial proposal. Her team, loyal and inspired by her vision, performed miracles. They developed new alloys for the kinetic facade, patented a revolutionary water filtration system, and designed a software that made the building's AI feel less like a machine and more like a living consciousness. Brittany was not just building a tower. She was forging an empire of glass and steel, a testament to her own resurrection. One night, as they stood on a high floor of the building's rising skeleton, the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. Caspian turned to her. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and he gently tucked it behind her ear. The gesture was simple, professional, yet it sent a jolt of electricity through her. "Gregory didn't just try to steal your designs," Brittany. Caspian said, his voice a low murmur against the wind. "He tried to steal your fire. What he never understood is that you are not the spark. You are the inferno." In that moment, looking at the city she was about to change forever with the unwavering belief of the most powerful man she had ever known beside her, Brittany finally understood. The ashes of her past were no longer a prison. They were the fertile ground from which her new life had grown. The Zenith Gala was the social and financial event of the year, a fundraiser held by the Devereux Foundation to mark the topping out of the Center for Sustainable Innovation the moment the final structural beam was hoisted into place. It was held in a custom-built pavilion at the base of the tower's gleaming skeleton, a dramatic setting where the city's elite could gaze up at the monument Brittany was creating. For Brittany, it was a night of profound, terrifying significance. It was her official debut not as a disgraced ex-wife or a mysterious recluse, but as the visionary architect behind the city's new icon. Dressed in a midnight blue gown that Caspian's assistant had insisted she accept as a gift, a gown that shimmered like the night sky, she looked and felt like a different woman. Her confidence was no longer a fragile borrowed thing. It was a core of steel forged in the fire of the last year. Caspian was by her side, a commanding presence in a classic black tuxedo. Theirs was a quiet, solid partnership understood by all who worked with them, but not yet declared to the world. Tonight, that would change. Of course, Gregory and Beatrice were there. They couldn't afford not to be for appearance's sake. To decline would be an admission of defeat. They moved through the crowd with forced smiles, their eyes burning with a venomous mixture of jealousy and rage every time they looked at Brittany. The success of her project was a direct reflection of their failure. Gregory's company had lost 3 major contracts since Zoe's exposé, and the whispers of his professional misconduct were growing louder. The evening's program culminated in a speech by Caspian, followed by the ceremonial signing of the final beam before it was to be lifted at dawn. As Caspian prepared to take the stage, Brittany gave his arm a light squeeze. "Thank you," she whispered, the 2 words carrying the weight of her entire reclaimed life. He simply covered her hand with his, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes. Gregory chose his moment with a predator's instinct. Just as Caspian was being introduced, he and Beatrice cornered Brittany near a display of the building's final renderings. "Quite the spectacle," Brittany. Gregory began, his voice dripping with saccharine condescension. "You clean up nicely. Devereux must be paying you a fortune to play the part of the genius." Brittany refused to be baited. "The project speaks for itself." "Gregory," she said coolly, her eyes level with his. Beatrice stepped forward, her smile a slash of red lipstick. "Oh, but does it speak the truth? I was just telling the editor of Metropolis magazine how familiar some of these concepts are. It's funny, I seem to remember you doodling similar ideas on napkins back when you were still living in Gregory's house using his resources." The insinuation was vile and clear. She was claiming Brittany had stolen the ideas from Gregory, this time a twisted reversal of the truth. "You are pathetic, Beatrice," Brittany said, her voice low and dangerous. "Am I?" Beatrice countered, raising her voice just enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Or are you just a very convincing parasite? You leached off Gregory and now you've sunk your claws into an even bigger host. I wonder what Mr. Devereux would think if he knew his pet project was built on the foundations of another man's intellectual property." This was their last desperate gambit to plant a seed of doubt, to tarnish her triumph at its very peak with the same old lie. But before Brittany could even respond, a voice cold as ice cut through the air. "I would think that he should be more careful about the company he keeps, Mrs. Shaw." Caspian Devereux stood behind them. He had stepped away from the stage, his introduction still hanging in the air. The small crowd around them fell silent, sensing the impending collision. He ignored Beatrice completely, his piercing gaze fixed on Gregory. "Mr. Shaw, I've been meaning to have a word with you. My forensic accounting team has been analyzing the metadata from your company's original patent filings for the Ethelgard Tower. It's fascinating what you can find. Embedded timestamps, for instance. Timestamps that show the core design files were created on a laptop registered to Brittany Wheatly a full 18 months before you ever filed the patent under your own name." Gregory's face went white. Beatrice's smile vanished. Caspian took a step closer, his voice dropping but losing none of its menace. I also have a sworn affidavit from your former lead engineer who you fired shortly after your divorce. He confirms that he received the initial framework directly from Brittany and was ordered by you to strip her name from all subsequent drafts. He let the information hang in the air, a public execution in everything but name. Then he turned his back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, and walked to the stage. He took the microphone, the entire pavilion now silent and rapt with attention. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes eventually finding Brittany's. Tonight we celebrate a building, he began, his voice resonating with power. But buildings are hollow shells without a soul, without a vision. For years I searched for a visionary. I found one whose light was being deliberately hidden, whose voice was being silenced. He paused, his gaze unwavering on Brittany. There are people in this room tonight who would have you believe that genius can be stolen, that a name on a patent is the same as the fire of creation. They are wrong. They mistake a reflection for the sun. He gestured towards the towering structure behind him. That is not my building. That is Brittany Wheatly's building. It is the product of her mind, her resilience, and her refusal to be erased. Then he did something that stunned the entire audience into breathlessness. He looked directly at Gregory and Beatrice, his voice ringing with cold, final judgment. Mr. Shaw, you threw away a diamond believing it was glass. You tried to bury a queen in the ashes, not understanding she is a phoenix. You are a footnote in her story, nothing more. He turned his focus back to Brittany, and his expression softened, a warmth entering his eyes that no one had ever seen before. So tonight I ask you to join me not just in celebrating a new landmark, but in celebrating its creator, the architect of the future, the heart of my foundation, and the woman I am honored to call my queen. The word echoed in the vast space. Queen. It wasn't a romantic platitude. It was a coronation, a public declaration of her value, her power, her rightful place. A gasp went through the crowd, followed by a tentative, then thunderous wave of applause. The flashes of cameras, once a source of her humiliation, were now a celebration of her triumph. Brittany stood frozen for a moment, the sound washing over her as she looked at Gregory's shattered expression and Beatrice's face pale with impotent fury. Then she looked at Caspian, who was extending a hand to her, inviting her to join him on the stage. He wasn't lifting her up. He was acknowledging she was already there. And as she walked towards him into the light, she knew she was finally, truly free. The morning after the Zenith Gala, Brittany awoke to a world that had irrevocably shifted. Her phone, usually silent, was now a constant source of light and vibration on her nightstand, buzzing with a deluge of texts, emails, and news alerts. For a moment, a cold, conditioned fear seized her, the old dread that she had done something wrong, that she was the subject of ridicule. But as she blearily focused on the screen, she saw headlines that told a different story. Devereux coronation billionaire slams. Rival declares unknown. Architect his queen. The Shaw deception metadata. Evidence suggests years of architectural fraud. Who is Brittany Wheatly, the visionary behind the Devereux Center? It was disorienting, like stepping out of a dark cellar into the blazing midday sun. Her friend Zoe's call was the first one she answered. Phoenix. Zoe screamed into the phone, her voice electric with glee. That's what I'm calling you now. The Phoenix. I have 6 major outlets begging me for an exclusive. I've seen public takedowns, but that Brittany, that was a public demolition. Are you okay? Are you popping champagne? Please tell me you're popping champagne. Brittany laughed, a sound that felt rusty and new all at once. I'm processing, she admitted, walking to her window and looking toward the city where the skeletal frame of her tower stood proud against the dawn sky. It doesn't feel real, Zoe. Oh, it's real, Zoe assured her, her voice turning serious for a moment. He didn't just give you a compliment, Brittany. He gave you back your name. Now go build your damn empire. Zoe's words became her mantra. The fallout for Gregory and Beatrice was a distant storm she observed but no longer felt. News reports chronicled the collapse of Shaw Industries with a clinical precision. She saw a headline about the board forcing Gregory's resignation, another about key investors suing him personally for fraud. She felt a flicker of something, not satisfaction, not pity, but a profound and final sense of closure, like closing a book she had been forced to read for far too long. The final chapter of their story came via a text from Zoe a month later, a link to a society gossip column. Beatrice Vance files for divorce from disgraced tycoon Gregory Shaw. Cites irreconcilable differences. Beatrice, who had built her entire world on the foundation of a stolen life, was now fleeing its ruins. Brittany deleted the message without a second thought. Their story was over. Hers was just beginning. With the public validation and the removal of Gregory's incessant sabotage, the final 6 months of the center's construction were a period of pure, unadulterated creation. Brittany stepped fully into her role not just as an architect, but as a leader. She moved with an easy authority, her confidence no longer a performance, but an intrinsic part of her. Her team, who had already respected her vision, now revered her, galvanized by the public display of her vindication. She would walk the construction site, her hard hat a familiar weight, the air thick with the scent of ozone from welding and curing concrete. She saw the impossible curves of her kinetic facade being fitted into place, the massive panes of photovoltaic glass catching the sun exactly as she had sketched. She wasn't just overseeing a project, she was conducting a symphony of steel, glass, and light. She took time to mentor the younger architects on her team, seeing her own past hunger and ambition in their eyes, and she made it a point to champion their ideas, vowing that no voice on her team would ever be silenced the way hers had been. Her partnership with Caspian evolved in the quiet spaces between the hectic demands of the project. It wasn't a whirlwind romance, but a slow, steady burn built on a foundation of mutual respect. One night she was working late in her office, wrestling with a complex energy distribution algorithm, when he appeared in her doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't speak, simply placed one on her desk and took a seat, studying the schematics alongside her. For an hour they worked in comfortable silence, their minds in perfect sync. "You look tired," he finally said, his voice a low murmur. "I'm fine," she replied, a genuine smile touching her lips. "This is where I'm meant to be." He reached out not to touch her, but to trace a line on the blueprint she was working on. "My father would have loved this," he said, a rare note of vulnerability in his voice. "He always believed a building should be more than a shelter. It should be an aspiration." In that moment, he wasn't the formidable billionaire or her powerful benefactor. He was just a man sharing a piece of his soul. And Brittany realized their bond wasn't just about the project. It was about a shared understanding of what it meant to build a legacy. A year to the day after the Zenith Gala, the Center for Sustainable Innovation was officially opened. It was an undisputed masterpiece. Critics called it a living poem and the dawn of a new architectural era. Brittany Wheatly was no longer an unknown. She was a star. That evening, long after the dedication ceremonies and celebratory dinners had ended, she and Caspian took a private elevator to the observation deck. The city glittered below them, a breathtaking tapestry of light and life. The air was cool and crisp, and the building around them seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a gentle living presence. It was her soul, rendered in steel and glass. They stood in comfortable silence for a long time, simply taking it all in. Caspian's arm was a warm, solid presence around her waist. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked quietly, his voice not breaking the peace but becoming part of it. Brittany gazed out at the vast skyline. Her eyes found the distant dark shape of the Ethelgard Tower, Gregory's monument to a stolen dream, now just another anonymous building among thousands, a relic of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. She thought of the woman who had cried in the alley, the woman who had served champagne with trembling hands. She felt no pity for her, only a gentle, respectful acknowledgement of her journey. That woman's pain had been the bedrock upon which all of this was built. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady over the sound of the wind. She turned her head, resting it against his shoulder, her eyes tracing the lines of her own building as it pierced the clouds. He doesn't have space in this world anymore. She took a deep breath, the clean, high-altitude air filling her lungs. There's no room for ghosts when you're busy building the future. Caspian tightened his grip, a gesture of silent, profound agreement. She was no longer a survivor of her past. She was the creator of her present. She had not been given a kingdom. She had meticulously designed and built it right here on a foundation of her own unbreakable strength, with a view that stretched out to an infinite horizon. Brittany's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is not defined by those who try to tear you down. It's a fire that lives inside you, and sometimes it just takes one person or one opportunity to help you fan it back into an inferno. She went from being a ghost in the background of her own life to the architect of a new future, proving that true power isn't about wealth or status, but about the unshakable belief in your own vision. Her journey from the depths of humiliation to the pinnacle of success shows that the most magnificent empires are often built on the ruins of a painful past. If her incredible story of resilience and ultimate triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to our channel for more unforgettable stories of strength and redemption. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload.